Thomas Williams sat quietly in the bustling Manchester courthouse, his small frame dwarfed by the imposing wooden benches and serious-faced adults. At 12 years old, he looked more like a child who should be playing football in the streets than someone facing a criminal charge. His worn-out sneakers barely touched the polished floor, and his hands clutched a folded piece of paper so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. The courtroom was a world of its own, a place of harsh fluorescent lights, the constant tap of computer keyboards, and hushed conversations that seemed to carry the weight of judgment. Thomas knew he didn't belong here, but circumstances had pushed him into this moment. His mother, Elizabeth, sat in the back row. She was a woman who had seen more struggle than joy, her face etched with lines of worry and determination. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices during the day and waitressing at night, always trying to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Thomas could see her hands trembling, her eyes never leaving him. The past few months had been impossible. The rent was always late, the electricity had been cut off twice, and Thomas's younger sister needed new school shoes. He had watched his mother cry silently after paying bills, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Something inside him had decided he needed to help. It started with a simple plan. Thomas knew about the small convenience store at the corner of their street. He had watched the owner, Mr. Peterson, count money during quiet afternoons. One desperate evening, after hearing his mother's worried phone call about potential eviction, Thomas made a choice that would change everything. The attempted robbery wasn't what people might imagine. It wasn't about greed or rebellion. It was about survival. About protecting his family. About doing something, anything, to ease his mother's burden. But plans rarely work out the way children imagine. The store's security system was better than Thomas had anticipated. What he thought would be a simple grab and run turned into a moment of panic, a failed attempt that brought him directly to this courtroom. Mr. Peterson had called the police, and the legal machinery began its relentless process. Now, sitting beneath the stern gaze of legal professionals, Thomas felt both terrified and strangely calm. The note in his hands was his truth, a child's explanation of love, desperation, and the impossible choices poverty forces upon families. Around him, lawyers shuffled papers. Clerks typed reports. The constant background noise seemed to fade as Thomas focused on the judge, who would soon enter and decide his fate. He thought about his mother's sacrifices, about his little sister's innocent smile, about the constant struggle that defined their life. Elizabeth had always taught him about honesty. The truth might be hard, she would say, but it's always the right path. Thomas believed her. And today, he was going to tell the entire truth, no matter the consequences. The bailiff's voice cut through the room's tension. "All rise," he announced, signaling the judge's imminent arrival. Thomas stood, his legs slightly shaking. The folded note felt heavy with potential, a simple piece of paper that carried the weight of his entire family's hope. In that moment, Thomas represented countless children facing impossible choices. Children who love deeply, who want to help, who understand struggle far beyond their years. He wasn't a criminal. He was a son trying to protect his family. As the judge's door opened, Thomas took a deep breath. Whatever happened next would change everything for him, for his mother, for their future. The truth was about to be spoken, simple and raw, from a child's perspective. The courtroom held its breath, waiting. The courtroom buzzed with a low, tense murmur as Judge Margaret Roberts adjusted her reading glasses. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in the young boy standing before her, Thomas Williams, a child who looked more lost than dangerous. Years of legal experience had taught her that every case carried a story beyond the simple facts presented in police reports. Thomas's hands trembled slightly as he stood, his oversized court-issued blazer hanging loosely on his thin shoulders. The prosecutor, a stern-looking man in his mid-40s, watched with a mixture of professional detachment and mild curiosity. Another juvenile case, he thought, another troubled kid from a difficult neighborhood. But this was different. Thomas wasn't like the other kids who had stood in this courtroom. His eyes carried a depth of understanding that seemed impossible for a 12-year-old. Behind him, his mother Elizabeth sat quietly, her hands clasped together in a silent prayer. The neighborhood Thomas came from was a place of constant struggle. Streets where opportunity was as rare as sunshine during Manchester's long, grey winters. Families fought daily battles against poverty, against the system that seemed designed to keep them down. Thomas had learned early that survival meant making tough choices. Mr. Peterson, the convenience store owner, had known Thomas for years. He wasn't just a stranger Thomas had targeted, he was a familiar face in the community. The attempted robbery wasn't a random act of violence, but a desperate attempt to solve a family crisis. Elizabeth worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices during the day and waiting tables at night. Her wages barely covered their basic needs. The rent was always a challenge, the threat of eviction a constant shadow over their small apartment. Thomas had overheard countless worried phone conversations, seen the stress etched on his mother's face. Judge Roberts began reading the note Thomas had prepared. Her professional demeanor started to crack as she absorbed the words. It wasn't a criminal's confession, but a child's heart-wrenching explanation of love and desperation. The note described their daily struggles. How Thomas's little sister needed new school shoes. How the electricity had been cut off multiple times. How his mother worked herself to exhaustion, often coming home with barely enough energy to prepare a simple meal. Each word was a window into a world most people never see, the hidden poverty that exists just beneath the surface of everyday life. Thomas remembered the night that led to this moment. The final overdue rent notice. His mother's silent tears. The way his little sister looked hungry and tired. Something inside him had snapped, he needed to do something, anything, to help. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the typical juvenile case he was used to handling. Thomas wasn't a hardened criminal or a troublemaker. He was a child who loved his family so deeply that he was willing to risk everything to protect them. Elizabeth's eyes never left her son. She knew the truth of their struggle, the impossible choices they had faced. Her love for Thomas was written in every worried glance, every protective gesture. She had raised him to be honest, to be good even when the world made it difficult. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The usual background noise of shuffling papers and typing became a distant hum. All attention was focused on Thomas, the small, brave boy who had dared to tell the absolute truth. Judge Roberts continued reading, her professional mask slowly dissolving. Years of legal work had taught her to be tough, to see cases as a matter of law and order. But this was different. This was about a child's love, about a family's survival. Thomas stood perfectly still, waiting. His entire future hung in this moment, in the hands of a judge who was reading the most important letter of his life. The note wasn't just a confession. It was a plea for understanding, for compassion, for a chance. The courtroom waited, suspended in a moment of profound silence. Something remarkable was about to happen. Thomas's hand shook as he handed the carefully folded note to Judge Margaret Roberts. The white paper seemed fragile, almost transparent, holding within its creases a story more powerful than any legal document. Around him, the courtroom held its collective breath, waiting. Judge Roberts's fingers carefully unfolded the note. Her professional demeanor, typically as rigid as the wooden bench she sat upon, began to soften with each word she read. Thomas watched her eyes, first stern, then questioning, and gradually filling with something that looked like understanding. The note wasn't a complex legal argument. It was a child's raw, honest account of survival. Thomas had written about their life, not to make excuses, but to explain. He described how his mother worked from sunrise to midnight, how his little sister sometimes went to bed hungry, how they had been on the verge of losing their tiny apartment. Mr. Peterson, the convenience store owner, sat in the back of the courtroom. He remembered Thomas as the quiet kid who would sometimes help carry groceries for elderly neighbors. This wasn't the profile of a typical young offender. This was a child who understood responsibility far beyond his years. Elizabeth's hands were clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She had raised Thomas to be honest, to always tell the truth, even when the truth was difficult. Now, that lesson was being tested in the most challenging way possible. The prosecutor, a man named Richard Harrison, watched with growing discomfort. This case was becoming something entirely different from what he had expected. Thomas wasn't a statistic or a problem to be solved, he was a child trying to protect his family. Manchester's legal system was used to seeing young offenders But Thomas was different. His attempted robbery wasn't about greed or rebellion. It was about love. About doing anything to prevent his family from falling apart. Thomas remembered the night that had led to this moment. The final overdue rent notice. His mother's quiet tears after everyone had gone to bed. The way his little sister's school shoes had more holes than fabric. Something inside him had decided he needed to help, no matter the cost. Judge Roberts continued reading, her professional mask slowly crumbling. Years of legal work had taught her to be tough, to see cases as black and white. But this was different. This was about a child's heart, about a family's impossible struggle. The note detailed their daily challenges. How they sometimes shared one meal between 3 people. How Thomas had been helping his mother by doing odd jobs in the neighborhood, washing cars, helping elderly neighbors with groceries, anything to bring in a few extra pounds. Around Thomas, the courtroom seemed to shrink. The harsh fluorescent lights, the polished wooden surfaces, the serious faces of legal professionals, all of them faded into the background. There was only Thomas, his note, and the judge who was reading his family's story. Elizabeth's love for her son was visible in every tense moment. She had taught Thomas about integrity, about facing challenges head-on. Now, that lesson was playing out in the most unexpected arena, a courtroom that could determine their entire future. The prosecutor shifted in his seat. Richard Harrison had seen countless cases, but never one quite like this. Thomas wasn't a criminal. He was a child who loved his family so deeply that he was willing to risk everything to protect them. As Judge Roberts read the final lines of the note, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The usual background noise of shuffling papers and whispered conversations had completely disappeared. All attention was focused on this moment, on this child who had dared to tell the absolute truth. Thomas stood perfectly still. His entire future balanced on the edge of this moment. The note in the judge's hands was more than a piece of paper. It was a plea for understanding, for compassion, for a chance to start over. Something remarkable was about to happen. The line between justice and mercy was about to be redrawn, and Judge Margaret Roberts wiped a single tear that threatened to fall from her eye. The courtroom remained utterly silent, with every person feeling the weight of Thomas's words. His note revealed a depth of family love that most adults rarely witnessed. Thomas stood perfectly still, his thin frame barely visible beneath the oversized court blazer. His hands, which had been trembling earlier, now remained steady. Years of taking care of his family had given him a strength beyond his 12 years. Elizabeth watched from the back row, her heart racing. She knew every struggle their family had faced, the missed meals, the constant worry about keeping a roof over their heads, the endless work just to survive. Thomas's actions, while misguided, came from a place of pure love. The prosecutor, Richard Harrison, looked uncomfortable. He had entered the courtroom expecting a straightforward juvenile case. Instead, he found himself confronting a story of raw human resilience. Thomas wasn't a criminal, he was a child trying to protect his family in the only way he knew how. Judge Roberts read the note again, her professional demeanor completely dissolved. The details were heartbreaking: how Thomas helped his mother by doing odd jobs, how he tried to shield his little sister from their family's financial struggles. Each word painted a picture of a child who understood responsibility in a way most adults never would. Mr. Peterson, the convenience store owner, sat quietly in the courtroom. He remembered Thomas as the kid who would help elderly neighbors carry groceries, who would sometimes offer to sweep the store's entrance without being asked. This wasn't the profile of a young criminal, this was a child with a remarkable heart. The note described their daily challenges in simple, honest language. How they sometimes shared one meal between 3 people. How Thomas would collect recyclable items to earn a few extra pounds. How he tried to protect his mother from knowing how difficult things truly were. Manchester's legal system had seen countless cases, but none quite like this. Thomas represented something more than a potential offender, he was a symbol of family love, of children who carry adult responsibilities far too early. Elizabeth's love was visible in every tense moment. She had raised Thomas to be honest, to be kind, to always try to do the right thing. Now, that lesson was being tested in the most challenging way possible. Her eyes never left her son, a silent prayer of support radiating from her entire being. The courtroom felt different now. The harsh fluorescent lights seemed softer, the wooden benches less intimidating. Thomas's simple, honest explanation had transformed the space from a place of judgment to a place of understanding. Richard Harrison realized this wasn't a typical case. Thomas wasn't looking for sympathy, he was simply telling the truth. A truth about family survival, about love that goes beyond traditional boundaries, about a child's incredible capacity to care for those he loves. Judge Roberts looked up, her eyes meeting Thomas's. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. The legal system, often seen as cold and unfeeling, was about to show its most human face. The note revealed more than just a story of attempted robbery. It showed a family's incredible resilience. A mother working multiple jobs. A son trying to protect his family. A community struggling to survive in challenging circumstances. Thomas remained calm, but inside, his heart raced. He knew this moment would change everything. Whatever the judge decided would impact not just him, but his entire family's future. Mr. Peterson suddenly stood up. He wanted to share something about Thomas, about the times the boy had helped him, about his character. The courtroom waited, sensing something significant was about to happen. Elizabeth's hands were clasped tightly, her entire body tense with hope and fear. Years of struggle had taught her to be strong, to never give up. Now, everything depended on this moment. The note in Judge Roberts's hands was more than paper. It was a testament to human love, to family bonds, to the incredible strength that can come from the most challenging circumstances. Something remarkable was about to happen. The line between punishment and understanding was about to be redrawn. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Judge Margaret Roberts made her decision. Thomas stood perfectly still, his heart racing beneath his oversized court blazer. Around him, the world of legal formalities seemed to fade into the background. "This is not a typical case," Judge Roberts began, her voice breaking slightly. She looked directly at Thomas, seeing not a potential criminal, but a child who had done something extraordinary, telling the absolute truth. Instead of punishment, the judge took an unexpected path. She called Elizabeth forward and connected her with social services that could provide genuine help. A job training program, assistance with housing, support for the family's basic needs, these were the tools of true justice. Mr. Peterson, the convenience store owner, surprised everyone by speaking up. He shared stories of Thomas helping in the neighborhood, carrying groceries for elderly residents, sweeping store entrances without being asked. "This boy," he said, "has more character than many adults I know." Richard Harrison, the prosecutor, found himself supporting the judge's decision. Thomas wasn't a criminal to be punished, but a child to be supported. The attempted robbery wasn't a crime of greed, but an act of desperate love. Elizabeth's tears flowed freely now. Years of struggle, of silent worry, of working multiple jobs to keep her family together, all of it seemed to lift in this moment. The system she had feared was now becoming her family's lifeline. Thomas hugged his mother tightly, tears streaming down his face. Their struggle was not over, but hope had found them in the most unexpected place, a courtroom that had become a beacon of understanding and mercy. The judge's decision meant more than avoiding punishment. It meant a chance for their entire family to start over. Job training for Elizabeth. Support for Thomas's education. Resources to help them climb out of poverty. Manchester's legal system had shown its most human face. Instead of seeing a problem to be solved, they saw a family to be helped. Thomas's honesty had transformed what could have been a devastating moment into an opportunity for change. Mr. Peterson offered Thomas a part-time job at his convenience store, helping after school, learning about business, earning an honest wage. It was more than just employment. It was a chance to build a different future. The social worker assigned to their case was kind and understanding. She saw beyond the paperwork, beyond the attempted robbery. She saw a family with incredible potential, just waiting for the right support. Thomas's little sister watched everything with wide eyes. She didn't fully understand the legal proceedings, but she understood something important had happened. Her brother had protected their family, and now good things were coming. Elizabeth's hands, usually rough from years of hard work, now held hope. The constant worry that had lived in her eyes began to fade. For the first time in years, she could see a path forward for her family. The courtroom, once a place of judgment, had become a place of transformation. Thomas's simple note had done what lawyers and arguments could not. It had shown the human heart behind the legal case. As they left the courthouse, the Manchester sun seemed brighter. Thomas held his mother's hand, his little sister skipping beside them. They had entered as a family struggling to survive, and they were leaving with a renewed sense of possibility. Mr. Peterson's job offer, the social services support, the judge's compassion, these were more than just practical help. They were a statement about human dignity, about giving people a genuine second chance. Thomas had learned an important lesson. Honesty, even when it's difficult, can change everything. His willingness to tell the complete truth had transformed their entire future. The family walked out of the courthouse, not as victims of circumstance, but as people with hope. Their story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Sometimes, the most powerful moments of justice come not from punishment, but from understanding. Sometimes, a child's honest heart can change everything.